If you turn up the policing dial, you turn up the revenue dial. My name is Thomas Harvey, and I am one of the co-founders of ArchCity Defenders. When I was in law school, I had just done a kind of study abroad, and was talking to a professor of mine there who said, we were all asking, how do you do international human rights work in the United States or in a place like St. Louis? And he said, you never know, you might see those violations in your backyard if you look closely enough. We were just seeing it, especially when we represented anyone who was unhoused. Anything they wanted to do to get back into housing was blocked by the existence of a warrant for a municipal ordinance violation. You could do everything else in the world to fix someone's problems, to fix their acute legal need in terms of a felony or a misdemeanor. But if you didn't address these ongoing municipal ordinance violations, they were going to get a warrant, they were going to get arrested, they were going to lose their job, they were going to lose their housing. That wasn't apparent to us in law school. And then you just began to see how much of a racket it was, how the cities were profiting, the lawyers were profiting, the judges were profiting. It was truly a kind of cash cow for the St. Louis legal community that they wanted to keep in place in spite of the incredibly devastating outcomes it was creating for poor people, mostly Black people in the St. Louis region. I think it's really important to realize that just because something is a common practice in your legal community, just because you see judges doing it and prosecutors doing it, doesn't mean it's legal, doesn't mean it's following the Constitution. In candor, none of us were some sort of civil rights crusaders thinking we're gonna challenge the 14th Amendment violations and the sort of cruelty and the jail conditions and the lack of appointing an attorney. And that legal culture was to allow poor people and Black people to rot in cruel, horrifying jails and bounce from jail to jail for months at a time, lose their jobs, lose contact with their families, right? Lose custody of their children in order to make money for themselves and the city. There was an individual and a citywide level profit motivation. When we would describe the way that municipal court system worked, who ran it, who the players were, this is apartheid. You are fighting apartheid. And I think at that time it was, for me and MJ, it was just a sort of a reassurance, made us realize that the things that we saw that we thought were outrageous were definitely outrageous. Here were the sort of nation's experts on these issues all saying not only is that a problem, but it's a problem on a grand scale, and it's a problem that is reminiscent of the kind of racist laws and systems that were created in the South, sort of pre-slavery and then post-enslavement, when you had the Black Codes and attempts to just sort of reinstitute slavery after the Civil War had ended. And so that framework helped us see that there was no way we could ever deal with this on a case-by-case basis. And that if we were ever going to really destroy that system or make any kind of meaningful changes, we were going to have to do it in a systemic way. When we would go out there and represent, to some tiny municipal court in Pine Lawn or something, and get a good result for 3 people, we were still in the same position as those private lawyers who were walking past, 50, 60, 100 people standing on a blacktop parking lot in the middle of summer in St. Louis, where it's, 90 degrees and 100% humidity, and they're waiting in a line for an hour to get in there to say, I don't have any money, please don't put me in jail. I could give you $10 tonight or $20 or whatever. Yeah, I think it was really critical for us to fight both on the individual and systemic level against the way the broader legal system was destroying the lives of poor people and Black people in St. Louis. Seeing some of our early clients and folks like Nicole Bolden, who we had enough time then to spend a pretty significant portion of our day with, trying to help not only her, but friends and family. We just got a picture of how deep and wide the impact of this racist legal system was. Having gotten to know Nicole and her family and her kids and friends, we knew it just wasn't right to let folks sit in jail just because they didn't have that money. And we knew that was a constitutional principle at that point. It was just being ignored by these clowns that were in the position of judge and prosecutor in these municipal courts they cared nothing about what the actual law was. It was purely motivated by making money for that city. Like some of the places that we initially had our focused advocacy on were just cities that published their budgets. Not only were they making an enormous amount of money, they were predicting they'd make more money the following year, right? Like their budget was predicated on an increase in revenue from their municipal courts, what does that mean? Well, you can only predict there's going to be more revenue from that court if you've chosen to increase the policing on these vulnerable people. It's not an organic thing. If you turn up the policing dial, you turn up the revenue dial. And if you turn up the desire to issue multiple tickets in one stop, you turn up the revenue dial. If you jail more people, you turn up the revenue dial. These are all conscious decisions made by people who are running those systems. I would say like 2012, 2013, we started like just sketching out what are the legal claims, what are the broader advocacy approaches that we could use, because there were just three of us. Like the idea of bringing system-wide class action constitutional rights cases didn't make sense to us at that time. We still thought an approach that would be more storytelling and advocacy would work, because we thought we could get the judges or the prosecutor in a room with people from their own community, because sometimes those folks were from those towns. We thought we could get them in the room just to share the story. So we began collecting more and more stories about what was going on. That turned into the Court Watch program that we ran. And it just turned out that was 2014, the overlap with the murder of Mike Brown. There were three great interns from WashU that helped write that report and put together the findings from that Court Watch study. Everything was pretty much ready to go when Mike Brown was murdered. So what we ended up with was just sort of documenting the violations in these three cities, Ferguson, Florissant, and Bell Ridge, not knowing that Ferguson was going to become the focal point. From our perspective, Ferguson was, sort of the middle ground bad actor. It kind of represented the typical process that was happening in all of these courts. There were more egregious violations, more cruelty going on in other cities. Why the DOJ's investigation was ultimately such a disappointment, because they made Ferguson was terrible. Ferguson was awful. There's no question about that. They made it appear as if that was the only place where this was happening, and they ignored this incredible opportunity to do region-wide change. That's why places like ArchCity and the legal clinics and others really needed to be around to do it, because nobody else was going to do that. It can't just be asked to change.